Welcome to Forbidden Planet TV. I'm Andrew Sumner, and I'm privileged to be joined by two creators who've not been on this show before, but we have loved at Forbidden Planet for many years. Welcome to Mahmud Asrar
Hello there.
and to Jason Aaron.
Hey, how's it going?
Thanks for joining us, guys. Very much appreciated. I'm a big fan
Thanks
of
for
both
having
of your
us.
works. Oh, no, it's absolutely my pleasure. As I was saying off camera before we started, I'm a huge fan of many of the things you've done. I love what you both did together on Conan, which is it was a book that's very close to our hearts at Titan, as everybody knows.
Right.
And yeah, I've loved your art for a long time, Mahmood. And Jason, Scalped is one of my all-time favorite books, which I've read more
Oh,
than once,
cheers.
mate. It's
Cheers. Thank you.
absolutely phenomenal
Much
work.
appreciate that. Yeah.
And by the way, I was so something I read about you recently, Jason, which I hadn't realised, is that one of our frequent guests on this show is a guy you'll have heard of, Garth Ennis, one of his
I'm
favourite
familiar.
authors. You're familiar with that, dude? And one of his favourite authors and one of my favourite authors we've discussed in the past is I think I've realised is your cousin, Gustav Ashford.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. You
Yeah.
guys discussed him?
Oh yeah,
That's cool.
more so off camera than on actually, because we both love the short timers and we both absolutely love the Phantom Blooper.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm the one who gave Garth the Phantom blooper the first time, just as a fan years
Yeah,
ago at I think maybe it was Wizard World Chicago. I'd stood in line and got my Preacher issues signed, and I was like, hey, I don't know if you've read my cousin's books, and he, of course, had read the Short Timers, but had never read the
yeah.
Phantom Blooper, and I gave him a copy. And
That
he got my address and he sent me some signed Hitman trades
yeah.
and an actual script, like a Hitman script, which seemed to have been written on a typewriter. I mean, it was a while ago, but it wasn't like
It was.
typewriter long ago.
What an absolutely great story. He definitely read it. Gents, as I say, it's very kind of you to join me. You've got a really interesting new book coming out from Image that we're all excited about. My comics buying crew here at Forbidden Planet very excited about the book. Um, Bug Wars. What can you tell me before we get into the book itself? What can you tell me about the book and how it came to be?
I've been talking too much, Mahmood. You want to take you go?
Well, okay, I'll go. I mean, yeah, I've always been a big fan of Jason. We worked on this Thor book a few years ago, and then ever since then,
That's right.
I wanted to work more with him, and then he recommended me to work on Conan, and so we got together on that, and we had a great time working on it for a few years. Like doing the 12 issue run that we did on Conan the Barbarian, and later on King Conan. It was a great time, but like we couldn't have enough. It was like we still had some itches to scratch, so like we were talking to each other, like I mentioned, like we should do something together, and like we felt it would be best if we did something creator owned, so where we could let loose and do what we want. And Jason reached out to me with his concept, and he let me know about it, and it sounded really fun and interesting to me. So like maybe you can take from here, Jason, and explain it a bit.
Yeah, well, I mean, to me, it literally goes back to when I was a kid growing up in Alabama. I've written comics about Alabama before, where there's Southern Bastards or Men of Wrath, which are both like dark crime books. But Bug Wars goes back to literally the house I grew up in Piney Woods, Alabama. Had a huge backyard, and I spent all my time kind of running around in that backyard, setting up Star Wars figures and He-Man toys and pretend sword fighting, running through the woods, like making up Tarzan stories in my head, and kind of always building these like elaborate fantasy sagas just in my mind, play it in that yard. So I feel like I, you know, fell in love with storytelling in that yard in those woods and kind of became a writer back then. I had no idea. I was just a kid playing, but I was doing like future work training with everything I was doing in that yard. So One of the books, one of the first comics I ever read that I ever pulled off the spinner rack was Sword of the Atom, Gil Kane and Jen Strand, where it
Yeah,
was, if you haven't read it, it was like the Atom gets his plane crashes in, I think, in the jungles of Brazil, and he discovers this like kingdom of tiny barbarian people who like ride frogs and fight rats, and so it's like a fantasy Atom adventure, and I loved that book. So I basically think that's the genesis of Bug Wars, is me really wanting for 40 years now to do a book like this. And the yard, the world that Mahmoud and I have built in this yard of the Slaymaker house is modeled on the actual yard I played in as a kid. The house is the same, the front yard, the backyard, the woods, like the arrangement of it. Like Mahmoud looked at the Google Maps photos of the house, and the
Right.
house the house actually burned down at some point years ago, so it's not exactly the same house, but it's roughly the same. And then I drew like a really shitty version of a map. That was our first map that Becca Carey, our designer, prettied up and made look a lot better. But I mean, so in some ways, you could say this is the most personal book I've ever done, and it goes back to my upbringing in Alabama in a bigger way than any comic I've ever written.
I found that really interesting that even though our histories are so different that and we were living worlds apart, I was growing up in Turkey, and with a Pakistani father, an Austrian mother.
yeah,
And we it's funny that we have similar experiences. Like I used to play in these backyards. I would bring my toys there. I was not very social with most of the other kids and stuff, and I would like I would dig up holes and make houses for all these characters, and beds out of grass. And similar to yours, I would build stories with these characters as well. It's I find that really fascinating that like we had similar experiences in such a way, and now it gets together in this book in a way.
Right.
So it's
That's
great.
awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you had a big backyard where there are woods
No,
and
not really.
trees
That's
and
the funny thing. We lived right in the city actually, but like every apartment in Ankara where I lived had like a backyard, which was not lush or grassy or anything. It's mostly mud and like soil and
right.
earth and stuff. But I would, like still, it would make it easier to, like dig up holes and stuff like that. And, like I would, build houses, corridors and everything. The bad thing was like the next day somebody else would probably have, like flattened it out and I would get pissed. I would build it up again. But yeah, I did that quite a few times.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. I mean, I think to me that this book is kind of based on like that kind of sense of childlike adventure, where you walk right out the door and there's a whole kingdom of stuff there waiting for you that you can find, whether that's a tiny little backyard in the city or a huge backyard in the country. I spent all my so much time like wandering along the stream that went through our woods and following it each direction. And to me, it felt like this was a kingdom that just went on for miles and miles and miles, right? In reality, I'm wandering around a really tiny, a really tiny space. But at the time, it just seemed like, this was Middle Earth. This was the
Right.
Hyborian
Mm.
kingdom. It was everything I needed was right there.
I think the interesting thing is when you're a kid, yeah, everything is in very close focus, right? I mean, you're not that physically big yourself. You're supple, so when you're like looking at the bugs in your backyard, and yeah, my house was had a bunch of pine woods next to it, and you're kind of lying on the ground, which you don't do as an adult, and you're looking at
Right.
everything. You're lying face down, and you're looking, and it's that far away from you, so everything's in this wonderful close focus, and you filter everything out. And I can see from the pages I've seen of the book how that's part of the inspiration and the energy of what you're doing here. And that door to the natural world and that door to fantasy, they're both kind of massively interlinked, right? And I think you bring that energy onto the page.
I mean, yeah, I mean, to be honest, Jason makes it really easy. Like I feel his scripts are very evocative, and like as soon as start reading, like the first few sentences that I read, I start imagining the visuals and stuff like that. And I feel he's a very visual writer in that sense. Even though he's not descriptive in the sense that you put a camera here or whatever, like he doesn't do it that way, but like the way he explains the story and the beats and the passion behind it, like I really feel it, and that really makes me want to convey that into images on the page. And we had this chemistry started, like way back, some few years ago, and so with all that like experience from before, now we're putting that into this new book with our own thing and our own world building and creating our own stuff. It feels something special, like yeah, I feel we bring much more to it this way.
Well, I'd say that Mahmoud makes it easy, like when you work with somebody who can do anything, I don't need to write to his strengths because everything is his strength, he can go big and epic and grand. And I think the scenes you see in this book, including right out of the gate in issue one, like the war scenes, are some of the biggest, most epic, powerful war pages I've ever seen in a comic book. So Mahmoud can do that. He's designing all these different sects of mites, the spider witches and the beetle barbarians and all the different kind of wondrous locations around the yard. There's like the secret lands of the spider witches hidden in some potted ferns, and there's the beetle, like the frontier rough and tumble beetle hive in under a brush pile. Um, so all that kind of stuff, Mahmoud can pull all that off, but also nail just like the human emotions at the center of the story, because it's really a story about this kid and his family and him having to, go to war in the yard to save them.
Can you just take a step back, Jason, to and familiarize us with the actual premise of the book?
Yeah, well, it's the kind of story we've seen before where, kid moves into this old house with his mom and his older brother. His dad died in this house. His dad was a famous entomologist, died under kind of dark, gruesome, mysterious circumstances, died in the house years before. And this was the house his dad grew up in and where he kind of fell in love with insects. Um, the at some point the kid Slade Slaymaker, who's about the 15, 14, 15, right, Mahmood, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean,
Um,
15-ish, yeah.
yeah. He, discovers a mysterious hidden artifact that shrinks him to the size of a bug. And he finds there's all these kingdoms of warring bug warriors in his backyard. So it's literally kid goes on an adventure in his backyard. But this is not the Honey I Shrunk the Kids version of that story. This is, you know, as if Garth Ennis had written Honey I Shrunk the Kids. It's like that version of the story. So it's a mature book. It's Mahmoud and I getting to completely cut loose, even more so, than we ever could on Conan, in terms of the violence and the subject matter. And again, like this is a dark and dangerous place for this kid to be, Insects on the face of the earth outnumber us about 1 billion to 1. And in this yard, it contains insects from all over the world. It's kind of his dad died penniless, owing, thousands to exotic bug dealers all around the world because he was filling this yard with the world's weirdest and wildest bugs. So there's a lot of the darkest and deadliest insects in real life you all find in this one backyard in West Bottom, Alabama. And Slade has to navigate all that, and of course, with the tiny sword wielding and magic wielding bug warriors called the mites.
Fantastic. What do you think? I know you talked about your history, your personal history, your childhood. Why did this particular slice of inspiration come to you now? Have you got any concept of what it was that birthed it for you?
Well, I mean, literally, it goes back to me being a kid, me reading Sword of the Atom. I think The Littles was, another one of those kind
Yeah.
of stories about like civilizations of tiny people, like the borrowers that live beneath your feet. Um, so I think I've wanted to do a story like this for a long time, and I've kind of been building toward it. It's with creator-owned books. It's a matter of figuring out the right time and finding the right partner to create that world, right? Like it's not I think to do that right, it takes time. And I think as soon as Mahmoud and I started talking about doing something together, this was this was the only thing I thought of, and thankfully he sparked to it. And then we've been working on it for years now, building the world. And this first book, book one, is a 6 issue story, and it's almost completely done. Mahmoud's drawn the first 5 issues are finished, and we're working on issue 6 now as issue one goes to print. And issue one is all basically 2 issues. It's almost 40
Yep.
pages of story with back matter stuff, kind of a lot of world building stuff about the bugs and the mites and all that. So I mean, it's really been something I've wanted to do a long, long time. It was just a matter of finding the perfect co-creator, and Mahmoud was definitely that guy.
Timing worked out just great, like I was coming to an end with my contract with Marvel, and I wanted to delve more into the creator-owned world and stuff. So like, I guess the stars aligned, as they say, like Jason mentioned the story, and like it felt like a good successor to what we've been doing before, and a nice change of pace from what I've done before. And we've done so much really, like preliminary work on this book that, all this building and learning. And so that's why it took a while, like it's been a couple of years since we started this. But, like we did so much research and getting building and creating and stuff. So now we're ready to finally, like put it out into the world. We're very excited about that. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of bug books. Like
Oh, yeah.
I think we've both amassed a big collection of bug reference books.
Yeah, I actually found a store around here that sells insect books, a book
Oh
that
wow. Oh
sells
cool.
only insect stuff.
Wow.
Wow.
A bookstore, yeah.
It feels like we should do a signing there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I actually couldn't find it open yet, but I will try to,
Oh,
like visit it one time. Not open all
Amazing.
the time.
With regard to your art on the book, Mohammed, you've does it's incredibly detailed in that way that you bring to the page. But I also feel when I look at the pages, there's kind of a lot of joy there. Actually, for me, it's
Mm.
that there's joy in the creation of that. Um, within the first book, within this first art, within the first issue, what were the things that you really looked upon and enjoyed? What were the characters or the creatures that you enjoyed illustrating the most? Do any stand out for you?
Um, I mean, the thing is like I would separate it into two parts, like the main the insects, and like the small world that we go into. That part is really exhilarating because like every part of the images that I create, like I have to do something new. It's not the world that we know. It's like a zoomed in world with a lot of made up stuff that we bring to this. And like all these people living there and all these insects over there, a lot of research goes into. And like I get to draw a lot of crowded scenes, and I love that because like I get to draw some like backstory stuff in there, not like maybe like something actually going on or whatever, but like some I could put in there some like some small people that are doing something that like when you look at it, they're not just like standing like like NPCs in a game or whatever. They're doing something, and they have a purpose, and like everything, like I put something, I try to put some meaning into everything that I do in those. So that's a lot of fun. But what I enjoy the most is the more personal sides of the story, with the family, and like the relationship between the family members, and the main character in the main in this first story, Slade's like personal battles with the world that he's in right now, and the stuff that he will be experiencing throughout the story. That is the part that really brings me joy in a way, although it's not always happy, but as a creator it gives me joy.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel that and I think that's evident on the page. One of the things I love about the fact that you're creating a kind of small universe insect book, but with that Jason Aaron sensibility that you touched upon before, is that is a kind of sort of subgenre in a way goes right back, to the creation of the Marvel universe, right back to the man in the anthill in Tales to Astonish, right back to the
Mm.
first appearance of Hank Pym, and it's kind of been there, kind of on the edges. I was going to ask you actually what comics, if any, had inspired you, but the one I had at my sleeve is the one you mentioned already, which is Sword of the Atom, which I'm a great lover of. That Gil Kane art in that book
Yeah.
is wonderful, and deserves to live on. But do you have any did either of you have any favorite insect movies that you would pull out of your mind if somebody, or small universe movies that have lived on for you over the years?
I mean, that's a good question. I mean, there's a lot of stuff for me that went into sort of the stew of, that cooked Bug Wars. And some of it is, like I said, Sword of the Atom, the Littles, the Borrowers, Miyazaki's Secret World of Arrietty
Yeah,
is inspired by that.
yeah,
Sectars, like I loved those toy. I got some Sectars in my toy cabinet right
brilliant.
here. He-Man, uh, the Conan was a huge part of that. Conan was kind of my, Robert E. Howard's Conan stories were my introduction really to fantasy in general. I think I read those before I read Lord of the Rings or anything else. Um, and then Conan kind of led me to discover Robert Jordan too, back when he was doing Conan books. So I think I've been a lover of fantasy stuff for a long, long time. In terms of films that directly inspired this, um, I don't know. I mean, it's such a huge genre. There's the genre of like human shrinks down and goes on an adventure, right? Like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids.
Yeah.
And there's a genre of tiny people, like the Borrowers. And this is very much a combination of the two of those. But I don't think I've seen anybody do, exactly what we're doing. Um,
Oh, I think
yeah,
that is
so
certainly true. I think that's absolutely right. I think you're plowing a new insect furrow, if you will.
right.
What about yourself, Mahmood?
Well, I mean, I would mention some of the same as Jason. Most recently, of course, Miyazaki's Arrietty has been really inspirational for me, and a memorable movie in that regard. I love that they would use these real life items, in their lives, like as a backpack or a clothing or something, like like one of, I don't know what you call them, those sewing finger thingies for, they use all these real life human
Thimble.
objects in their lives, yeah. And we try to incorporate that kind of stuff in our story as well. So like throughout the story, we can see some real life objects that were thrown away or like discarded or whatever, and then these people have made use of them in their lives and stuff. So there's that. Aside from that, I always enjoyed this, like this, people shrinking down or like living in a small world. It's always been fascinating. Even the Gulliver's Travels kind of stuff has been interesting. And what was that movie? These people, they got into the small ship and they went inside the body of another person. It was a
Oh,
comedy movie.
fantastic voyage.
Yeah.
Could be,
Yeah.
or in Inner World or something like that. Was it
Inner
something?
space.
Inner Space, right?
Yeah.
Right. I remember the part where they drink alcohol and then they grab
Yeah,
it
right
from the
on.
ship and stuff. So yeah, that kind of stuff always fascinated me as well. So like, yeah, all of that stuff kind of finds its way into this story, I feel. And as Jason said, I'm also a big fan of fantasy. I'm a very scientific minded person and I really love sci-fi, and I'm really kind of hardcore with my sci-fi. I don't like fantasy mixed with sci-fi and whatever. But when it comes to work, when I'm doing it, I think I enjoy the most when doing fantasy, like creating all these magical stuff, and like the stuff that we can't find in our real world, making up everything as we go, and creating everything from our own minds rather than like from real stuff, as you would say.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would, in terms of what Mahmoud's saying about the kind of the borrowers part of this, where we're trying to incorporate some elements of human society into the mite culture. You see a little bit of that in this story. I'll give you a tease of like what's to come. It's like, there's all these different sects of mites. One of the ones that we don't really see much at all in this book. I mean, you get just glimpses of them are the roach knights. They're the they're the mites who live in the house, right? All these other mites are yard mites. And there's kind of a rivalry between the yard mites and the house and the one sect of house mites. So the roach knights are the ones who their culture will revolve in a much bigger way about things that trickle down to them from human society. So we will dive into that part of it much more as we go. And the other thing, what Mahmoud was talking about just the world building that goes into this and how fun that is. Like, I can't believe I've waited until 20 years into my comic book career to create like a creator-owned fantasy world because I love it so much. And fantasy has been such a big part of me as a reader and wanting to become a writer. Now that I'm doing it, I'm like, why did I wait so long to do this? Because I love it so much. But it is also, I fall down so many rabbit holes. Like, I've peppered Mahmood with a lot of emails just about names. I've kept changing names probably up until this first issue goes to print. I will continue to tweak names of things because names are so important, right? In the fantasy world building of like what are these sects called? Um, what are these different locations called? Like just everything, the building the nuances and details of that is I would say this Bug Wars is probably the most I've worked on a book since like the first one I ever did, The Other Side, the Vietnam War book I did. I worked like crazy on that one because I didn't have anything else to do. This one, like the benefit of us kind of taking a few years to develop this book, I keep going back to even the issues, that I wrote a long time ago and tweaking and changing the language of it and the dialogue and the names. And so it's maybe an obsessive amount of work, but it also makes me happy every time I go back and reread these.
Right. I have to respond to two parts on this. First, I have to compliment Jason for the names. All these names that he gives to these characters, these places, and everything. They've been such an inspiration for me in creating all the visual stuff, like the maggot monks or the roach knights and stuff like this. Just brings images to my mind. Like it was so easy to visualize these things and make unique visuals for all these different creatures and these people and places. So that's one thing. And the same goes for me as doing the hard work on any book. I don't think I've worked this much on anything before. It's been insane. And as he's been doing revisions with the names or whatever, I've been doing revisions with the artwork. Like literally today, I just revised the fourth issue and tweaked some panels and pages, and then yeah, we're hassling some of our other collaborators like that. Yeah, I'm telling Matt Wilson, who has been with us on Conan as well. Brilliant colorist, and he was about to start the issue, and I'm like, I'm sorry, I have more tweaks for you. So hopefully he's not mad at me.
Well, guys, it's inspiring and exciting to you talk about this kind of rich fantasy tapestry that you're weaving. And anybody who's watching this and has been fascinated by this lovely conversation, you can pre-order Bug Wars 1, which should be out in February, from the links attached to our conversation. And guys, thank you so much for joining me. I've loved hearing about this book, and I love the pages I've seen thus far, and I can't wait to dig into the first issue.
Thank you so much. We can't, get enough. We want to talk about so much about this book. We enjoy it. So thanks for having us.
Yes, thanks. Yeah, it feels so great to finally be able to talk about it. It's been living in our heads for so long. We're excited
Yeah.
to get it out there. So thank you.
Yeah, the pleasure is all ours. You take care of yourselves, and again, check out the book on the links attached to this video. This has been Forbidden Planet TV. This has been Mahmud and Jason. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care of yourself, gents. All the best.
Cheers.
If you're enjoying watching Forbidden Planet TV and you're enjoying watching us talk to the world's most interesting and accomplished filmmakers, authors, artists, musicians, creators, subscribe right here. See you soon.